Support for Charlotte Readers Podcast is provided by Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, a connector of readers, leaders, and learners with 20 locations and a 24-hour online presence at cmlibrary.org.
Welcome to Charlotte Readers Podcast, where authors give voice to the written words. In this episode, guest hosted by novelist Sarah Archer, we visit with Joni Elliott, author of The Audacity of Sarah Grayson, in which Sarah Grayson, a 32-year-old greeting card writer, is tasked in her mother's will to write the final book in her best-selling suspense series. Despite her lack of confidence, Sarah takes on the project, even with her mother's publisher actively working against her. As family secrets begin to surface, she realizes she may threaten her mother's legacy. Maddie Dawson, best-selling author of Matchmaking for Beginners, had this to say about the book. Joni Elliott has written an enjoyable, funny, page-turning novel about the ups and downs of a woman's quest to find herself and the family she thought she knew. My name is Landis Wade, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm a recovering trial lawyer turned author turned podcaster of books and stories, and I really appreciate you being here with us today. You can find out more about me at my author website, landiswade.com, and I'd love to have you visit. For all things related to the podcast, check out charlottereaderspodcast.com. You can find a lot of great resources there. We have show notes of every episode with pictures of the authors, photographs of their book covers, links to their websites and social media, and more. And we have the community blog there. It's a collection of readerly and writerly content provided by writers in the community and authors who've been on the show. And you can sign up for the book report at our website, charlottereaderspodcast.com. We send it out every 2 weeks. It's free. We don't spam you. That takes way too much time. We just keep you updated on what's going on with the podcast, provide a dose of inspiration, provide some free content from time to time, some links and other fun stuff related to the reading and writing world. We're a proud member of the Queen City Podcast Network and the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, a collection of author-hosted podcasts putting out this kind of content to a worldwide audience. And you can find us pretty much anywhere you like to listen to your podcast. You can also check out our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Charlotte Readers Podcast. This is a place where we provide exclusive content for our supporters. For just a few dollars a month, we provide access to exclusive audio interviews between me and authors who have appeared on the show, where they share their wisdom about writing and the business of writing. It's a great way to get a good education if you're a lifelong learner like I am. But enough with this prologue. Let's meet today's author. Today's show is guest hosted by Sarah Archer. Her debut novel is The Plus One. It was published in the U.S., U.K., Germany, and Japan. Is currently in development for television. She's a Blacklist Screenwriting Mini-Lab Fellow who's had material produced for Comedy Central. And the list of good things to say about Sarah goes on and on. You can find out more about Sarah at our website, because Sarah was on the podcast. That's at charlottereaderspodcast.com. And so now I'm actually going to be, before I do that, I need to let you know that after Sarah leads this interview today, we're going to jump over to Patreon, and we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to both of them. It's writing group advice with Joni Elliott, and it's going to be co-hosted by Sarah Archer and myself. We're going to dive into that topic, great topic. So now I'm going to be turning over the podcast steering wheel to Sarah Archer. Sarah, take it away.
Well, thank you, Landis. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Joni, for being here. I'm thrilled to talk with you.
Thank you both for having me here. It's great to be a part of this show.
So I absolutely loved reading The Audacity of Sarah Grayson. It was a wonderful read, and even before I got a chance to start it, I was drawn in by the premise already. I feel like you've created sort of simultaneously a dream situation and a nightmare situation for a writer, with Sarah being in this position where she, as a first-time writer, plucked from obscurity. She's handed a major book deal. She has millions of readers waiting for her work, a huge platform, but she also has the stress of having to please those millions of readers and honor her mother's legacy and honor her publisher's wishes and hopefully try to satisfy herself as a writer somewhere in the middle there. How did you come up with the idea for this novel? What was your inspiration for that premise?
Well, I was teaching writing at the University of Maryland, and I had this dream of writing and publishing a novel. And I reached this point in 2015 where I realized that if I kept teaching writing instead of writing, I would never fulfill that dream. And I have a lot of colleagues who are great at multitasking. They're teaching and writing and doing it well at the same time. But I knew that if I didn't take some leap and go for this dream, it would never happen. So I took this leap. I quit my job and I devoted myself to writing. And that first semester, it went from challenging to hard to terrible to agonizing. I had so many starts and stops, and it got sad. And when you start to get distracted as a writer, you start doing all sorts of strange things. Some people bake, some people do yoga. I began organizing my entire house, cleaning up my closets, organizing my pantry. I began wandering the stores of the aisles of the Container Store. Anyway, I had a very clean house and no book. And so I was really feeling sorry for myself, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake ever. And about 4 months into this very sad process, I was just kind of crying to myself, give a lot of self-pity. And I was in my bathroom. That's a good place to cry. And I thought, well, at least nobody cares if I write this book. Nobody truly cares. I had no editor, no agent. Nobody even knew I was writing a book. I kind of didn't really even dare tell people so they wouldn't ask me about it. I left it vague. I said, I'm stepping away from the university for a writing project. I left it very vague. And so I thought, well, nobody cares. Nobody even knows I'm writing a book. And I thought, well, what would it be like if a lot of people knew, like thousands or millions? What would that be like? And all of a sudden, I just pictured this sad sort of person who had the weight of the world on her shoulders, who had to write this book for millions of people. And that's when Sarah Grayson was born in my bathroom. It was a home birth with no medication. And that's when I first imagined her. And that's when I just started asking a lot of questions. And I knew pretty quickly, I think even that same day, that it was her mother who would put her in that situation, who was a famous writer, iconic, and had left her that book. And so that's when things started to come together for me, and that became my book, and things started flowing from then. And I eventually stopped going to the Container Store.
Nice. Yeah, I think every writer could probably write a book about the things we do while procrastinating writing.
True, absolutely.
Struggle with writer's block, but we're very productive at cleaning the house and doing the shopping.
So true. My house is not very organized now, but I have a book.
It's better than containers for sure. So one of the other things that was really fascinating to me about the premise for this book was it kind of contains a book within a book in a way. There's, the novel you wrote, The Audacity of Sarah Grayson, but then there's also the Ellery Dawson series, which is the series that Sarah's mother, Cassandra, was writing and that Sarah now has to finish off, which is a very different type of book. They're, I guess you would say, thrillers, crime dramas, like high octane, adventurous. How much work did you do to develop that series within this book? Like, how far did you actually go in plotting those stories out, figuring out the characters, kind of writing this separate series within it?
That's a great question, Sarah. And actually, nobody's asked me that yet. I actually had to plot out all 5 Sarah Grayson books and do a basic skeleton of each one, who the main characters are, what happens in each one. So that I knew in book 5 what she sort of needed to mess with and figure out. And also my husband is just saying, you've got to write the Ellery Dawson books at some point. And I'm like, I'm not really a suspense thriller writer. And he's like, you could become one. We want those books. And I've even had some readers say, well, I want to read Ellery Dawson book 5 now. And so anyway, but I did, Ellery actually has a great story, and through different drafts of Sarah Grayson, there was more of Ellery's story in there. There were excerpts of her story. I like books within books, like Fangirl, and she has a great story within her story that she has actually published. But I had to think through it and have it be clear. And I wanted Ellery Dawson's story to have some ties to Sarah's story. So I had to really be clear, even if the reader didn't know, I had to have it clear in my mind so that it would have some impact in Sarah's life and in the arc of her character and in the story itself.
I love that. Yeah, I could really feel that coming through, how well developed these characters were. And I'm right there with that other reader. I would love to read the Ellie Dawson books too. So if you ever decide to do a spinoff, I'm there.
I love it. Thanks.
One of the other things that was a lot of fun for me in reading this was the quotes. So at the beginning of every chapter, you have a quote by a writer about writing. And I pulled out a few of my favorites here to share. From Thomas Mann, you have, "A writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people." Very true. From Zadie Smith, "Every moment happens twice, inside and outside, and they are two different histories." And from Elmore Leonard, "When you write, try to leave out all the parts readers skip." So there was a great kind of mix of wit and wisdom and philosophy in these quotes. They were a lot of fun. How did you find these? How did you kind of decide which quotes you wanted to put throughout the book as you were doing that?
As I was doing this deep dive into writing Sarah Grayson, it was a deep dive into the craft of writing fiction for me again. I had studied creative writing in my master's program 15 years prior to this, so it had been a while. And so I was diving into this again. I wanted this book to be the very best it could be. And for me, that was revisiting this craft and learning all that I could about it again, and reading every good book I could get my hands on that was just a good novel. Obviously, good writers are good readers, and also the craft books too. And so I just started collecting my favorite quotes. And I was also I love podcasts that are about writers and writers talking about their work, like this one. And so I just started collecting quotes, tons and tons of quotes. And so they're just meaningful to me. They're inspiring to me. And so I had a lot at the very end, and it was just choosing some of the most inspiring ones to me, and the ones that fit Sarah's journey. And they're chosen for each chapter too, with what's happening. And so they inspire me. There were ones I needed because, like Sarah, I was struggling with the book and I was struggling with writing. And so they speak to me and to Sarah.
Definitely. And one of the other quotes that you had in there that was really interesting to me was one from John Green. He said, "Writing is something you do alone. It's a profession for introverts who want to tell you a story, but don't want to make eye contact while doing it," which is such a great line. But it was also really interesting to me that you chose that one within the context of this book, because so much of the book, I think, is about kind of the communal or collaborative nature of writing. You have Sarah, who is following this individual journey and finding her voice as a writer, but she also has different editors she works with. She has a writers group she visits. She has, there's a screenwriter who's adapting books for film, and translators who translate them into other languages. And she obviously has other writers in the family who she's working with and using their ideas. Even fan fiction is brought up in the book, this idea of like a writer taking something from a world created by another author and building their own story within that. So I'm curious to know about sort of where you fit on that spectrum. Like, how do other writers play into your life as a writer, and how much of your writing do you think is you just alone in a room writing, and how much is involving other people?
Well, that's a very insightful question. It's interesting, as writers, there's this tension between this work that is so solitary. I mean, we do it alone. There's no other way to do it. We are at our computers with our heads doing it, and yet it is so social. I mean, we send it out into the world and we want other people to read it, and we ultimately need other people to respond to it, to give us feedback. We need the editors, we need to listen to other readers and writers. So that tension between I'm doing this alone and I don't want to talk to anybody about it, and don't give me too much feedback or anything, but this whole wide world that we want to eventually speak to it's a pretty fascinating paradox, I think. For me personally, I have debated whether I'm an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. I definitely recharge by being alone, but I need other people.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I feel like so much of that is really at the heart of kind of what writing is. You're taking these ideas inside your own head that are very internal, and you're trying to share them with someone else, and trying to navigate that kind of bridge between our consciousnesses. So it was a really interesting part of the book to me to see how that sort of played out. But I'd love to pause for a minute here. I think you had a passage you were going to read for us from the beginning of the book, right? So I'd love to let you kind of take it away with that.
Okay, so this is just right from the beginning, and to just set the scene, it's the world premiere of the first Ellery Dawson book. So they've made a movie of it. And so this is Sarah, chapter 1, and it starts with a Stephen King quote. Writing is not life, but I think that sometimes it can be a way back to life. She refused to be triggered by breakfast food, so she went straight for the waffles. Real Belgian ones made of yeast dough, not batter. She'd eaten 2 of them already, hot bronzed waffles with Nutella and strawberries and vanilla bean ice cream. There were times to avoid your triggers and times to chew them up slowly and deliberately. Plus, eating was preferable to small talk. Not that anyone would want to talk to her. They were here for Ellery, and Ellery was everywhere. Life-size cutouts of Ellery and her family stood proudly next to Belgian flags and clusters of bright red poppies. Since Ellery's family was stationed at the embassy in Brussels, it was an obvious design choice, but achingly unoriginal. Elegant black and gold streamers hung loosely across high ceilings. A Neuhaus chocolatier table crowned the center of the room with pralines, truffles, and dark chocolate medallions stamped with Ellery's portrait. Taps of Belgian beer flowed into frosty mugs with Ellery quotations about gifts and potential and other ridiculous ideas. It was a smashing tribute to someone who didn't actually exist. Sarah unwrapped an Ellery chocolate and quickly bit her head off. A clean snap is a sign of excellent chocolate, she'd read once. She let it melt slightly in her mouth before she chewed and swallowed. She unwrapped another medallion and bit the heads off several more, leaving a pile of unfinished chocolate torsos on her plate. For $300 an hour, her therapist, Sybil Brown Baker, might diagnose this as passive-aggressive behavior. Or was it misplaced anger? Sybil Brown Baker sent a pamphlet home last week, How We Transfer Feelings of Shame and Pain. Sarah read it word for word and returned it the next day with her editing feedback, all free of charge, bad semicolons, comma splices, and sentence fragments. She didn't teach freshman English for nothing. She just earned next to nothing, for now. Her freelance work with Cozy Greeting Cards International was poised to take off. They loved her work and thought she had a real knack for cancer cards, and could she please send more? A jazz band performed painfully slow Michael Bublé covers while Sarah opened another chocolate. Her older sister, Anna Kath, waved at her from the waffle bar. She chatted happily with a screenwriter Sarah had met earlier. Was this their 10th movie premiere or 11th? Their mom was nowhere to be seen. She was probably talking to reporters. At least they were done walking the red carpet, that veritable tripping hazard all lit up with flaming torches. Fans shouted their mother's name, Cassandra Bond, like they didn't get out much, and shot their arms over crowd barriers with Ellery Dawson books for her to sign. Didn't they know they could save $3.99 on their ebook?
I love that. That's so fun. You get so much of Sarah's personality right away in those first 2 pages. It's a very strong character for sure. One thing that is mentioned in there is the references to Brussels, and that was something that really stood out to me when I was reading this, was the kind of geography of the book. You cover a lot of territory in terms of the settings. There's references to Belgium and Croatia. There are parts of the book that take place in England, New York City. I think they go to Maine, Maryland. How did you pick the settings for this book? Are these places that have some kind of personal significance for you?
Well, I was living in Maryland when I wrote most of the book, and so it felt like a great place to begin the novel. And Sarah is from Bethesda, Maryland, and that's where she grew up. Maine is where we're vacationing every summer, and it's such a peaceful, beautiful place. So I wanted her to be able to connect to that place. And I feel like nature is just such an important part of our creative process. Sarah ended up being her parents, or her father is from London, so that felt like a great connection there. I love doing research there. And what's interesting about, so Sarah was born in the East End of London, and I had been to London before, but I'd never been to the East End. And so I'd done a lot of research about where she was from and where her father was from, but I'd still not been there. And I'd I'd actually finished a full draft of the novel before I'd been to the East End. And I was just hoping that when I got there, that it would be as magical and wonderful as I had made it out to be in my story, because it's a lot different than the West End and some of the other parts that I'd been to. And I was so happy when I'd finally arrived there and did some research there to find that it was everything that I had hoped that it would be. And it is it's full of street art. And a lot of artists, very diverse cultures there. The food is the best in London, and I think in the East End. And it's just a place of a lot of resilience. And so anyway, that was a really wonderful part of my research in the book.
Yeah, the book made me want to travel for sure. I wanted to visit all of these places. So it's interesting to hear a little bit about your kind of personal background and where you've lived. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of your writing background. With Sarah, obviously, we see a lot in the book about her journey to, I don't know if it's necessarily become a writer, but at least realize she is a writer, accept and embrace the fact that she's a writer. What's that journey been like for you over the years?
You know, I went to college and became a middle school English teacher because I loved reading, but honestly, I did not like writing. And I had no ambition to ever become a writer at all. In fact, I just thought I was kind of an English teacher with the dirty little secret, which was I didn't really like writing. So mostly I could commiserate with my students and say, yeah, writing's tough. I mean, I knew it was important and I was good at it, but I didn't love it. And it wasn't until I was 28 and back in graduate school that I took a creative writing class, a workshop on young adult fiction, kind of on a whim, because I just really loved the professor. And that was when it was my first try at writing fiction. And I discovered I was kind of good at it. And that's when I switched my emphasis in my master's program to creative writing. And that's when I wrote my first novel. It's a novel I never published, but it's a novel that really taught me a lot. It was a YA novel. And from there, I ended up not doing much for probably 10 years or so. I would do a little bit here and there, but I was mostly focused on my family and doing other things. I taught piano. I just was busy, and I went back to university teaching. And it just didn't, honestly, it didn't feel like my time until that moment where I was like, I really need to, this is something I still want to do. And I got to buckle down and get it done. And so, when I stepped away from the University of Maryland in 2015, I thought, I'm just going to take 2 years. And the book ended up taking me a lot longer than that. It took me about 3.5 years. And then by the time I sold it and got it published, it's now been 6 years. But I have yet to go back to university teaching. I would still love to. But right now, I have more writing that I want to do. So I'm working on the next book, which isn't in the Sarah Grayson world. It's another book. But I have another, I want to write a sequel to Sarah Grayson. And there's one more companion book to Sarah Grayson. I can't say who it is about because it would be a spoiler, but I can tell you, Sarah, after we turn the mic off. So anyway,
I'm excited.
It's about a character you don't meet until the end of the book. So, but she has a story that I really want to tell, and I sketched her story out. So yeah.
I think I might know who you're talking about, but
okay.
I'm interested to read it regardless. So on kind of a different note, one of the threads that comes up a lot in the book is tea. You have Sarah's a tea drinker. A lot of the characters drink tea. Her sister makes these kind of beautiful tea blends with like herbs and fruits and things. Am I correct in guessing that you maybe drink tea a lot while you're writing?
I'm a big fan of herbal tea, mainly. And what's funny is as I wrote the book, I started drinking more tea. And so I even have at my desk right now an insulated teapot so I can make a couple of cups and have it stay hot while I'm in my writing session. But yeah, the tea kept sounding better and better. I created this sister of Sarah Grayson who's always making these tea blends, and I was thinking that sounds really good. And then I'd go and try and find some. So there's even a little tea shop in Park City, Utah, that has tea blends that would be like what Anna Kath, Sarah's sister, would would make. I was taking pictures of them and I was buying some. And so anyway, yeah, now my family drinks more tea than ever. So, and we even did my publicist we were doing a promotion with Bigelow tea and my book. So yeah, tea plays prominently and I do love it.
Yeah, you've got to have your writing fuel.
You do. Are you a tea drinker, Sarah?
I'm a coffee drinker who wishes I was a tea drinker. I feel like tea is better for you and I wish that I liked it. And I do enjoy it, but usually when I'm drinking tea, I kind of wish I was drinking coffee instead. So, but some of the blends that her sister was making sounded very good. I was like, oh, I could be a convert here. That sounds delicious. So I would love to ask just a few more kind of like rapid fire questions about your sort of nuts and bolts of your writing process. I always find that sort of thing interesting. So you're drinking tea. Is there like a particular time of day or a place where you like to write?
I write best in the morning for sure, even though I'm not an early morning person, but I definitely write the best in the morning, about an hour after I wake up. My best window.
Nice. Are you writing on paper? Do you use some kind of device?
On my computer, definitely. I always have a writing notebook, though, that I'll jot some ideas on, with my pen. So I've always got pen and paper by me, but yeah, fully on computer.
Sure. And I'll ask if you're a pantser or a plotter. And you've probably heard those terms, but just in case anyone hasn't, a pantser is someone who kind of goes by the seat of their pants. They find the story as they write. A plotter usually outlines first.
I am a plotter, but I'm open to pantsing. So I find that as I plot everything out and come up with a really good outline, once I start the actual prose and I'm working through it, I always get surprised. Things always take some different turns than what I had plotted out. And so the plot becomes a good skeleton, a good guide. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just open to the surprises as I work through. I'll be like, oh, really? I didn't know that you were going to do that. That's very interesting. Thank you for letting me know. And so, yeah, so mostly plotting with a little bit of surprises.
Yeah, that's good to leave a little bit of room for surprise and inspiration, I think. Do you typically like to focus on one project at a time, or are you someone who juggles multiple writing projects?
One novel at a time, for sure. I can handle, a nonfiction piece or an essay or something like that. And I'm always, keeping a journal, but one novel. Can you do more than one, Sarah?
I tend to focus mostly on one at a time, but I'll have projects kind of in rotation. So I'll write a draft of something, put it away, send it to people for notes, work on something else in between, come back to the other one. So I've usually got like maybe 2 to 4 things that I'm working on, but not simultaneously, if that makes sense.
Very good.
Yeah. And another thing that was really interesting to me in the book was this idea of comfort drawers. So it's something that Sarah has and some of her family members have, where they'll build a drawer that they fill with kind of like keepsakes, objects that have some kind of special memory attached to them, things that bring them like comfort or nostalgia, which was a really beautiful idea. And I was wondering, if you were making a comfort drawer, what sorts of things would you put in it for yourself?
So what kinds of things would I put in it?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you first that I got the idea from Sarah von Bronick, who wrote Simple Abundance. And I haven't made a comfort drawer for myself, but I wanted to. And I kind of have a little cabinet that does have some comfort things. I would keep some dark chocolate, Dove dark chocolate with almonds. I think I would keep a really soft blanket. I would keep David Whyte's poetry. He's one of my very favorite poets. I think some photos of some of my most favorite places and photos of my children. So I think it's words and beautiful places. And, I think some things that smell good. I love essential oils, so I'd probably have some of my favorite essential oils. There's one called Citrus Bloom. It smells like orange blossoms in Arizona. That's where I was born. So yeah, I think we'd have that.
That sounds wonderful. A great collection of memories and appealing to the senses too. So I think we're coming up pretty close in our time here, but before we go, I would love to just ask you, since this is your debut novel, what has that experience been like for you? What's it been like to have your first novel come out into the world?
have been thrilled to finally have it come out. There's so much leading up to it that to me it felt a little bit like childbirth for me, in that I was so ready to just have this baby. I just wanted to get this done and have her finally come out. And it's been thrilling. I love this story. I know that I'm the one that wrote it, but I grew to love this character and her story, and it's one of creative courage. Mary Oliver said that the most regretful people on earth are those who felt the call to do something creative. And I'm paraphrasing, but they're the ones who left that rest of an uprising and gave it neither power nor time. And Sarah is one who was living a life where she was denying herself that. And so I love this. I love the story of giving something creative in oneself power and time. And I feel like when we do that, we're living a fuller, more happy, alive life. And so I want people to feel that. And I hope that they do. I hope they find creative courage in this story.
Yeah, I think it provides that kind of inspiration for sure. I felt that way.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump back in. This has been a great episode. I've enjoyed listening. When I put this together and was thinking about listeners who could be a great guest host for this, I thought of Sarah because of her book, The Plus One. And if you hadn't read it or listened to her episode, it's speaking of what ifs. Her character doesn't have a boyfriend to take to a wedding, and so she builds one, and it creates all kind of problems within the family. And then Joni here creates this book where the daughter of this best-selling author has to write, the book. And I'm thinking, these people were made for each other. They come up with these kind of things, And so I just have a couple of questions because, Joni, as I'm listening here, you said a couple of things that jumped out at me. One was the fact that after you got over the, crying in the bathroom and getting off on the wrong track and finding your way back, you said it took 6 years to get this thing into the world. And I'm just wondering, that's a long time to birth a baby. And I'm just wondering how hard that was for you. Are you normally a patient person? Is that something that was difficult for it to take that long to finally get it into the world?
I had to really learn patience with the process. And it's something I would repeat over and over again, be patient in this process. And so the actual writing of it took about 3.5 years. But then, all this time afterwards, trying to find an agent and then trying to sell the book. I think there is this constant resistance that we have to face, I think, in doing any good thing, but certainly in the creative process. I think we all face this voice in the back of our heads that says, can you really do this? And is this worth doing? And does it matter? And are you the one to even be telling this story? And I found Isabel Allende said, show up, show up, show up, and then the muse shows up. And so I really had to come to this point where I really had to believe in the power of small and simple things. That doing those small, courageous daily acts of simply showing up and turning on my computer and trying to get that word count in, that would get me to where I needed to go. And I think that's honestly the secret of success in the creative world, in the business world, and anywhere, that if we're willing to stand up to that voice in the back of our head that questions us, that we can get there.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm not a very patient person, so I would have 6 years is a long time to get a book out. But the other thing that I was thinking about here is that this idea that, and it's happened to me, and it's probably happened to both of y'all and other times too, but you start out with this idea, like you said you probably had, that you're going to go write this book, and the book you ended up writing was not the book you started writing. Can you talk about, was that a lesson to you in the writing process as to whether you should go in with it all figured out or whether you should kind of let it unfold?
That's a great question. There's a writer, Joan Bauer. She's a fantastic writer of YA fiction. And she said, whatever words that you end up having to cross out and get rid of lead you to the ones that you keep. And so, and I believe that. And so for me, it's whatever process gets you to whatever you keep at the end. And so, so for me, plotting something out is the process that works for me, that helps me get to the lines and the chapters that I am going to keep. And I do need that structure. And so, yeah, there's things that end up changing along the way, but it's the current, that process that I follow that ultimately helps me find my way, even though it switches along the way. And I have to say, one of my most favorite authors in the world is Kate DiCamillo. And she's a children's and YA novelist. And she wrote one day, she said, I was out taking a walk thinking how my current writing project is a mess, just a really, really big mess. But then I got to thinking, it has to be a mess. It has to be a mess right now in order for me to get out of the mess. And that is just the process of it being a mess and then it being not a mess. So I'm writing this down so I can remember that this is the process. And I just kept that because I thought that's just it. Creating art is messy and that's how we work. So anyway, it's comforting to me.
And like not Sarah Grayson, but Sarah Archer. Like Sarah Archer, I like the beginnings of the chapters with the quotes. And you started your reading today with Stephen King. My last question here, which you quoted him as saying, "Writing is not life, but I think that sometimes it can be a way back to life." Was that true for you in this particular situation?
Yes. I felt in this process a rebirth for me. I feel, having gone through this and continuing in this, more alive than I have ever felt. And, the poet Naomi Shihab Nye, she said, no one ever says, I wrote it down and I didn't feel better. We usually, there's something powerful about writing it down. Whether that's the journal or the story or the whatever piece, there's something in us that writing it down, getting it out that way, it does something for us, for our souls.
Well, that's great. Well, listen, Sarah Archer, not Sarah Grayson, I want to thank you for leading the discussion about Sarah Grayson today.
Thank you, Landis, and thank you, Joni. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, I'm delighted.
I love how, even as we're talking, you're pulling out these great writing quotes. I want to write them all down.
Exactly. Well, you can just listen to it again when it comes out. So we're going to jump over in just a second here now to Patreon. It's patreon.com/Charlotte Readers Podcast. You heard them talking about coffee and tea. For less than the cost of one of those each month, you can come get all this exclusive content, help us support the podcast. And we're going to be talking about writing group advice with Joni Elliott and Sarah Archer. And they have both blogged on it and they both talked about it. So it must be important. And I'm going to be learning as I go. And so this will be fun. Joni, thanks so much for being on Charlotte Readers Podcast.
Thank you. It's been a delight to be here.
Well, that's it for today. Another fine author giving voice to the written words. You can subscribe to this podcast for free at Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and most any podcast platform you like to listen to your podcast on.
If you like what we're doing, please consider leaving a short written review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast platform of your choice, because when you do, our authors' voices travel much farther and wider in podcast land.
And if you're inclined to help us help authors give voice to the written words, and you'd like some member-only content cultivated by our authors and me as our thanks, please consider becoming a member supporter.
You can find out how to become a member supporter and more about today's show and all previous episodes at charlottereaderspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.
We really appreciate it. I'm Landis Wade for Charlotte Readers Podcast.
Charlotte Readers Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network, powered by OrthoCarolina. For more information, go to queencitypodcastnetwork.com.